Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy, and just before I do start tonight's programme, just a wee point of order. If any of you want to comment on any of tonight's items then on Twitter, then please make sure that you use the format for the hashtag Scotland at 7 as it appears on our tweets, and that way we'll get a more effective conversation going. So I'll start with the usual Ukraine update, day 300. Oops. Yes, so as I was saying, I'll just restart with today's Ukraine update, day 322. Slip finger there on the keyboard, apologies. The head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group has claimed his forces have completed the takeover of the Ukrainian town of Solidar. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked the heroic defenders of Solidar, but gave no update on the military situation in his nightly address on Tuesday. Russian forces trained tank, mortar and artillery fire on Advikva, Ukraine's armed forces said, a second focus for Russia's south of Bakhmut and not far from the city of Donetsk, held by Russian proxies since 2014. Russia's artillery fire in Ukraine has gone down dramatically from its wartime high, in some places by as much as 75%, according to US and Ukrainian officials. The drop in shelling is further evidence of Russia's increasingly weak position on the battlefield nearly a year into its invasion. Western officials have warned that Ukraine will not be able to take back a significant amount of territory from Russia without an increase in military capability, including tanks and armoured vehicles. Russia and Ukrainian forces are currently too closely matched for the Ukrainians to be able to mount a major offensive, Western officials have said. They said a Ukrainian call for 300 tanks was not an unreasonable number to create the force mass needed for them to go on the attack. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said his government would purchase a US air defence system to donate to Ukraine. The US-built air defence system was worth $302 million, Defence Minister Anita Anand said. Ukrainian troops are set to begin training on the Patriot missile system in the US as soon as next week, US officials said. Training program will take place at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, with the program expected to take several months. The US is also reported to be considering sending Stryker armoured combat vehicles to Ukraine. The move could be announced next week, but no final decision has been made. So I'll move on to our first item of this evening. Political talks aimed at breaking the deadlock at Stormont went ahead without any nationalists after Sinn Féin was effectively excluded from the meeting today. The leaders of Northern Ireland's 5 largest parties had been due to take part in a roundtable discussion with the UK's Foreign Minister, James Cleverly, and the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris. However, shortly before the meeting was due to begin, Sinn Féin withdrew after it said the UK government had informed it that its party leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, had not been invited. A Sinn Féin spokesperson said Ms MacDonald, who is a TD for Dublin Central, was told she could not attend as she is elected in another jurisdiction. Unionist politicians suggested it was due to a protocol issue, as Mr Cleverly had not yet met his Irish counterpart, Minister for Foreign Affairs Michael Martin, and therefore could not meet Miss MacDonald, who is also leader of the opposition, until he had done so. In a statement, the Northern Ireland office, the NIO, said the meeting was for Northern Ireland politicians to talk through issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol with SOSNI, the Northern Secretary, and the UK Foreign Secretary. That's the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and the UK Foreign Secretary. Speaking in central Belfast, Ms MacDonald told reporters it was bizarre and unprecedented that the British government chose to seek to exclude the leader of Sinn Féin from a leaders' meeting. She said that there had been a chance this morning to mark progress, to exchange views, to be constructive, to work together, to listen to each other. But rather than having that kind of meeting, a kind of British Tory petulance has emerged. I think that is a terrible shame, she said. Ms MacDonald said she would raise her concerns with the UK Prime Minister, and at a time where we need maximum inclusion, maximum engagement, maximum dialogue, we don't need this kind of nonsense. We don't need this kind of divisive, disrespectful politics. The SDLP subsequently decided it could not, in good faith, take part in the talks without all parties present and did not attend. The meeting, which was overshadowed by controversy, went ahead with the DUP Alliance and Ulster Unionists, that's the UUP, attending. Northern Ireland has been without a functioning assembly or executive since elections in May, when the DUP refused to re-enter the power-sharing government as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Northern Secretary is legally obliged to call a fresh assembly election within 12 weeks if it is not reconvened by January 19th, though previous deadlines have been missed and extended. The Scottish Parliament has approved of the fourth National Planning Framework. The framework, which was formally passed today in Parliament, puts the climate emergency and biodiversity crisis at the heart of planning. It lays out the policies which local councils must use to decide future planning applications up to 2045, including where to site housing, schools, roads and industrial facilities. Excuse me. As a result of the framework, all planning decisions must now give significant weight to the climate and nature crises. Similarly, development proposals must minimise greenhouse gas emissions as far as possible and contribute to biodiversity enhancement. Development proposals for all forms of renewables will be supported while protecting national parks and national scenic areas from inappropriate development. Speaking in the Scottish Parliament today, Minister for Public Finance, Planning and Community Wealth, Tom Arthur, said that to deliver on this government's ambitions to make Scotland fairer, greener and more prosperous, it is right that they prioritise key national policy objectives through the framework's policies. He said it was always the Scottish Government's intention to put climate and nature front and centre of the planning system, understanding what that means for future development across Scotland. The National Planning Framework also enables different opportunities to be realised that will transform the economy and society, such as through development of renewable energy technologies. The National Planning Framework 4, the NPF4, will support the sustainable growth of the renewable sector while continuing to protect the most valued natural assets and cultural heritage. Mr Arthur welcomed comments from Scottish Renewables, recognising the revised draft NPF4 as probably one of the most supportive planning regimes for renewables in the whole of Europe. However, he said that it does not mean any development in any place. Wind energy will not be being supported in national parks and national scenic areas. Drawing on consultation responses, a more explicit policy position on wild land will be subject to an impact assessment and appropriate mitigation, managing, measuring and monitoring. Another key objective of NPF4 is to help people live well locally in the future by embedding principles of local living and 20-minute neighbourhoods into how places and communities are designed and created. The NPF4 takes a fresh approach to spatial planning, which will create spaces or places with improved access to the facilities and amenities required by people in their daily lives that support thriving, sustainable, healthy communities and protect and enhance our environment. The aim is to create more balanced, diverse communities and neighbourhoods. Excuse me. A leading food security expert described Brexit as a disaster. Speaking on the BBC Farming Today programme, Professor Elliott, Director for the Institute of Global Food Security, said, "Since Brexit, we have divorced ourselves from the food safety systems. There is no checks and inspections for any food coming into the UK, so we've left ourselves wide open to criminal activity." Professor Elliott went on to say, "Rather than actually taking back control of our borders, we now have no control at all. It's such a glaring hole, a disaster waiting to happen." The SNP's international trade spokesperson said that the SNP have regularly expressed concern at the UK government's failure to establish import controls for food from the EU, including high-risk food like meat. Commenting, Richard Thompson MP said, "These comments from a leading expert on food security echoes what only the SNP are willing to say. Brexit is a disaster. If we were still part of the European Union single market, we would have direct access to information sharing networks on food, health and hygiene. Instead, Brexit has left a glaring hole in our trade and food borders, leaving our security, biosecurity and citizens' safety at risk." And all of this is happening to a country that overwhelmingly rejected Brexit, yet continues to suffer the consequences each and every day, he continued. With both Labour and the Liberal Democrats joining the Tories in their pro-Brexit stance, it's clear only the SNP are willing to fight for Scotland's democratic will. That is why there can be no doubt that independence is the only way to protect Scotland's trade and agricultural sectors and rejoin our allies in the European Union. Prelim exams are being rescheduled for some secondary school pupils on the day that secondary school teachers went on strikes across Scotland. A further wave of disruption is planned over 16 consecutive days beginning next Monday. Primary schools were closed on Tuesday due to strike action, and today secondary school teachers are on strike. Educational Institute of Scotland, the EIS, the NASUWT and the Scottish Secondary Teachers Association, the SSTA, members have rejected a 5% pay increase, including rises of up to 6.85% for the lowest paid. The teachers' unions are demanding a 10% increase. The Scottish Government say that they are unable to allocate any more money from the fixed Scottish budget without cutting funding from elsewhere. Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville has said that she is keen to continue dialogue to find a resolution to the dispute, but regretted that the union's pay demands are simply unaffordable. Soaring prices for energy and food could persist for the next 2 years, hurting global efforts to combat poverty and the climate crisis, a report prepared for next week's World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland has warned. The WEF's annual Global Risks report found the international cost of living crisis unleashed by the COVID pandemic and Russia's war in the Ukraine topped the list of concerns in a survey of more than 1,200 global experts, policymakers and business leaders. Sounding the alarm in the run-up to the annual gathering of world leaders in the Swiss mountain resort, it said the energy and food supply crunch was likely to persist for the next 2 years as the biggest risk to the world economy. Highlighting how the pandemic and the war in Europe have triggered a series of deeply interconnected global risks, it said the fallout could undermine collaboration between countries to tackle longer-term problems, including the climate crisis, protecting biodiversity and efforts to reduce poverty. The WEF report, produced in partnership with Marsh McLennan and Zurich Insurance Group, argued that a window for action on the most serious long-term threats was closing rapidly. Concerted collective action is needed before risks reach a tipping point, it said. Unless the world starts to cooperate more effectively on climate mitigation and climate adaptation over the next 10 years, this will lead to continued global warming and ecological breakdown. Inflation has soared in many countries around the world after a hit to the global economy from COVID was followed by Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, driving up wholesale energy costs and disrupting food supply chains. Excuse me. A third of the world's economy is expected to be in recession in 2003, reflecting the effects of the war, lingering high inflation, and the rising cost of borrowing for households, businesses, and governments alike as major central banks push up interest rates. This frog in my throat continues. Scottish Green MSP Maggie Chapman has said all fire stations must have the necessary decontamination equipment for firefighters. Maggie Chapman raised the issue this afternoon in a portfolio question to Eleanor Whittam, the Minister for Community Safety. In her answer, the Minister said that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service puts a high priority on improving equipment and facilities to reduce exposure to contaminants. She also committed to working with the Fire Brigade Union on the issue. Last year, the World Health Organization declared firefighting to be a carcinogenic profession. Occupational exposure experienced by firefighters leads to cancers that are preventable. Next Thursday, Ms Chapman will be using a members' debate to discuss the Fire Brigade Union's decontamination campaign. Speaking after her question, the Scottish Green MSP said, "The role that firefighters play is so important to us and our communities. They put their bodies and well-being on the line every day in order to keep us safe in some of the most devastating and dangerous circumstances. Yet, a study of the emergency service staff in Scotland said firefighters' cancer mortality rate was 1.6 times higher than others, likely due to the exposure to toxic substances while on the job. Some cancers were nearly 6 times more prevalent in firefighters than the general population." Ms Chapman said that every firefighter deserves the best preventative medical care, education and support to reduce the risk of cancer, and they also need the right equipment and facilities to enable them to decontaminate after attending fires. The North East MSP called on the Community Safety Minister to produce a plan to upgrade facilities and infrastructure at fire stations across Scotland to ensure these frontline workers have what they need to be safe. "I look forward to further discussion on this issue and the Fire Brigade Union's decontamination campaign at my members' debate next Thursday," said Ms Chapman. 6 people have been injured by a man wielding a knife during rush hour at the Gare du Nord station in Paris, French authorities have said. Police arrested the man at the busy station, which serves as a hub for local transport as well as trains to London and Northern Europe, after they opened fire and wounded him, said a police source who asked not to be named. The man arrived at the station at about 6:42 a.m. with an extremely threatening manner and first attacked a passerby at the entrance using what the Interior Minister, Gerald Darmanin, described as a dangerous homemade blade. The attacker then entered the station, one of the busiest rail hubs in the world, and targeted other passers-by. 1 minute later, at 6:43 a.m., he was stopped by plainclothes police officers who had been on their way home from a shift. They used their service weapons alongside border police who also intervened. 3 shots were fired. The attacker was arrested and was being treated in hospital. Mr Darmanin described the attack as lasting a very short time, but was very violent. One of the injured was a French border police officer. He said the attacker was not carrying identity papers and was not believed to have said anything during the attacks. Paris police were working to establish his identity. The motive for the attack was not immediately clear. France remains on a state of heightened security alert after a series of deadly attacks by Islamist radicals since 2015. The Gare du Nord attack is being investigated by regular Paris police, not anti-terrorist police. Magistrates will decide how it should be categorised. Mr Darmanin said quick police intervention had been crucial and praised the police as well as security staff of the state rail service operator SNCF. Okay, so The Ugandan government has declared an end to its Ebola outbreak less than 4 months after cases were first reported. Since the 20th of September, 56 people have died from the virus, which is spread through body fluids, and there have been 142 confirmed infections. The country has reported no new infections in more than 42 days, twice the maximum incubation period of the virus, a World Health Organization benchmark for a country to be declared Ebola-free. The latest outbreak of the Sudan strain of the virus was one of the worst Uganda has experienced in 2 decades. There is currently no vaccine against the strain. The outbreak began in Mubende district in central Uganda and spread to neighbouring Kasanda. Cases were also reported in the capital, Kampala. The 2 districts were placed under months-long lockdowns. This is a very great day for the country, said Emmanuel Buna, a health minister spokesperson. I'm confident to say that we have handled this situation in the shortest amount of time possible. He acknowledged that the lockdowns had affected people's livelihoods, but added, these restrictive measures were able to contain the outbreak from spreading to other parts of the country. The Uganda Red Cross said it would not immediately pull out from affected areas. Trials for a vaccine against the Sudan strain are underway. Government officials signalled an intention to continue to develop vaccines from the Sabin Vaccine Institute in the US, Oxford University, the Jenner Institute in the UK, the Serum Institute of India, and the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the World Health Organization Director General, congratulated Uganda for its robust and comprehensive response. Lessons learned and the systems put in place for this outbreak will protect Ugandans and others in the years ahead. This is the first outbreak of the Sudan strain of Ebola in Uganda since 2012. More medical training posts have been filled in 2022 than at any other year since records began in 2013. Latest recruitment figures show 1,073 posts for doctors in training were filled successfully. That's 93% of the 1,155 that were advertised. The majority of specialties filled at 100% include core psychiatry, clinical radiology, and core surgical training. General practice training places saw 99% also filled successfully. Health Secretary Humza Yousaf said, the results of this year's recruitment process continue to show that Scotland is a highly desirable place to live, train and work as a trainee doctor. This is testament to our first-class medical education system and flexible training opportunities. Building on our high staffing levels that have consistently grown for the last decade is absolutely vital to the recovery of our NHS, and I would like to thank each and every doctor in training who has opted to pursue their career in Scotland. All NHS Scotland staff work tirelessly to meet the healthcare needs of our country. He went on to say, we realise that there is always room for improvement and will therefore continue to work with NHS Education for Scotland to support our trainees as much as we possibly can to ensure the sustainability of our workforce. And in our final item for this evening, after years of calling for empty Ministry of Defence homes in Edinburgh to be utilised to help tackle the housing shortage, SNP MSP for Edinburgh Pentlands, Gordon MacDonald, welcomed the news that the MOD is set to release the properties to house homeless people. The local MSP has been calling for the housing to be used for several years. He has previously raised the issue in Scottish Parliament and has written to numerous UK Government Defence Secretaries requesting the empty MOD homes in Edinburgh be used to help homeless people across the city. In 2021, it was revealed that nearly 11,000 MOD homes were empty across the UK, with 900 unused in Scotland, a number that has barely changed in years. These homes have been left empty for years instead of being put to good use for those in need. Commenting, SNP MSP Gordon MacDonald said, I am delighted to see the empty MOD homes in Edinburgh will now be put to good use. This very welcome news is not before time. It was never right that so many homes were left lying empty, which is why I have long been calling for them to be used to help people whose lives would benefit from being housed in the properties. I hope that this news now translates into action quickly so that we can have as many people living in safe and warm homes as possible. Well, that's it for this evening. So that was the news for you and here at Scotland at 7. Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting 7, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So if you follow the address and that you can see on the screen now, then that would be very helpful indeed. And then there are other ways to help us. You can either volunteer here behind the scenes, or please retweet us or follow us on Facebook. Again, the addresses are available on the screen now. And as I said at the start of the show, if you are responding to any of the items that we've said today, then please use the hashtag Scotland at 7 without the little at in a circle. So tomorrow's edition of Scotland at 7 will be hosted by Ruth Watson, so be sure to tune in. And that's about all I've got left for you, so I'll just stop talking now and let you get on with the rest of your evening. Good evening.